You're being asked to vote in a referendum that is, on all estimations, a fraud. Australian nationalists advocate a no vote. I'm now going to speak to you briefly about some of the reasons why this has to be considered a no vote. According to some of the people who wish to vote no, particularly the official campaign, this has got nothing to do, or should have nothing to do, with the subject of race. For Australian nationalists, it has everything to do with race, and quite rightly so. There are, in this debate, three essential elements, three enormous elephants, or if I can use the more appropriate phrase, yowies in the room. And none of these is being mentioned by the regular suspects, the usual commentators. The first one is immigration. None of the Aboriginal spokesmen, and really none of the whites who are chasing after the Yes campaign, are discussing the impact of immigration upon this discussion. I would have thought, amusingly and to the side, that of all people in Australia, official Aborigines or any other Aborigine for that matter, would raise the issue of immigration, but they don't. If we allow that the population of Australia is to be exploded over the next 20 or 30 years by immigration, this immigration will come from the third world. There is absolutely really no reason at all why any migrant from the third world would have any particular regard for Aborigines at all, nor consider why he should be voting in a referendum, that is those who are here now, in favour of it. The immigration question is the rise and fall of the issue of the voice. In 30 years or 40 years, if such a thing were to be proposed, as it is, and then adopted into Australia's constitution, which it may, certain groups will inevitably take it out. The immigrant groups, and it's hard enough for Europeans to come to terms with our Aboriginal friends, but the European groups have had at least 200 odd years to do so. The migrant groups have not. All they would see is a group of privileged people enjoying some sort of special right that they themselves don't have. That's how it will be perceived. The immigration question is the beginning of the death of the voice before it's even adopted. In fact, I might even predict that it could be that there are those who are promoting the voice are simply doing so to undermine European Australia to the advantage of others who haven't even arrived yet. The next yowie in the room is the vexed matter of Aboriginal identity. It has been mentioned by some of the spokespeople on both sides of the yes or no in the would-be Aboriginal camp. It has certainly, generally speaking, not been discussed by those whites who are talking about the long history of colonialism and disadvantage and so on and so forth that they say should inspire the adoption of the voice. The question is, who is an Aboriginal person? Now, unlike certain people who advocate a no vote, be it the Hansonites, be it even Jacinta Price, or perhaps Mr. Warren Mundine, who advocate no, an Aboriginal person is not a person who has some Aboriginal ancestry somewhere, who thinks he's an Aboriginal and is adopted by and said to be an Aborigine by some people who also say that they are Aborigines. In other words, Aboriginal identity from our point of view is not, say, a coat that you can put on and take off when it is convenient to you. An Aborigine is a person who must be defined by race. Therefore, when people say that this referendum should not be about race and it mustn't be about race, it's about diversity and acceptance and tolerance and so on, they lie. The referendum must, or a referendum must, be about race. The real question is not a voice to Parliament by Aborigines, real ones or would-be ones. It's about the position of an old race upon the continent. The Australian nationalists believe and argue and have argued and have always said that the Aboriginal identity has the inalienable right to exist upon the continent. Therefore, it must be a matter of race. So who is an Aboriginal person? An Aboriginal person, as said, cannot be somebody with some Aboriginal ancestry who says he's an Aboriginal person and does certain things that he claims makes him one. It has to be defined by race. In liberal society, small L liberal globalist society, there is absolutely no one who will allow such a definition to be adopted. Since they will not allow such a definition to be adopted, they condemn the remnant of the Aboriginal race to genocide. Genocide not by some weapon, but genocide by racial amalgamation. The idea that in 2 or 3 or 4 centuries there could be people walking around the continent who are 1% Aboriginal and claiming to be Aboriginal is a fraud and a lie. It's an historical lie. It may be the case that an Aboriginal person is a person who is pretty much 100% Aboriginal racial descent, or at the very minimum, a person who is a half Aboriginal and can identify with and actually mixes in with Aboriginal society. It could be that persons who are a quarter or an eighth Aboriginal are persons who are Aboriginal descendant and who have some empathy with the idea of Aboriginal culture and identity, but even they can't necessarily be defined as Aboriginal. Anyone with a lesser proportion of Aboriginal blood cannot really be defined as Aboriginal at all. At most, those people could be defined as people who wish to, for some reason or another, put one small part of their ancestry as determinative of the rest. And for a liberal, a small L liberal, that is a very strange attitude to support. After all, according to small L liberals, race doesn't exist at all. In fact, some of the Aborigines would-be supporters, white liberals, do not believe in the existence of race. Consequently, one often wonders what they're talking about when they talk about Aborigines. After all, by their definition, we're all simply hominids. Those people who wish to preserve Aboriginal culture, or at least the memory and some of the traditions of Aboriginal culture, it may well be they preserve it by modern means. Yes, that is true. And in that sense, you might argue that many aspects of Aboriginal identity are already challenged by the modernity in which they live. Allowing for that, it still does not mean that Aboriginal culture must disappear. There are many aspects of Aboriginal culture, mythology, and history which rightly must continue upon the continent. But those things can only properly be done by persons who are actually Aboriginal. The third element in the room, the third Yowie, if you like, in the room, is the question of us. And by us, I don't mean all those Australians, the Australian of the passport, but those people of European origin. According to the latest theory put up by many of the advocates for the voice, they say that Australian history has 3 distinct phases. One of them is the ancient phase, populated by our Aboriginal friends. The second phase, they say, is the British settlement and the introduction into Australia of the British laws, some of the British rules, the British Empire, and the dispossession of the Aborigines by British settlement. And then miraculously, the third stage, they say, is the advent of multicultural, the multicultural society, which takes some of the traditions from the past, moves into the present, and you have 200 or 300 supposed nationalities living in Australia, all side by side. There's only one problem from the Australian nationalists' point of view. Where did our nationality go? In other words, where did the Australian go? That group of white folks here who consider themselves native to our soil, with an identity of our own, albeit, yes, cast in the European, not the British style, but the broad European style, but nativised to our own soil. Where did John Curtin go? The man who waged the great patriotic war against Japan in the name of that very definition of Australia and Australian. Our nationality, the Australian, has been abolished from the arrangement. Now, we must ask ourselves a question here. If some of those who advocate for the voice, be they white folks or be they misguided Aborigines or persons of part Aboriginal origin, have actually committed an offence against my nationality, our nationality, the Australian. If they are prepared to abolish the Australian and call us either British descended, which a lot of us just aren't, or in the alternative part of multiculti, if they are prepared to do that to us, why would it be that these same people have any sincere regard at all for Aborigines? Those are the three Yowies in the room. It now leads to one final point. It has always been the position of Australian nationalists and other patriotic people, as said, that the history, mythology, and aspects of the Aboriginal culture have the right to survive upon the continent. They certainly do. At the same time, the European Australian nationality, which emerged on this continent, which defended this continent, which many Aboriginal persons took up arms also to defend, at least as a state, they have earned themselves, if you like, the respect of the Australian people. The Aborigines, of course, are not the Australian people. They are the Aborigines. They may carry Australian passports and be part of a state. They are singular and they are unique. The issue of the negotiation, if you like, between the European Australian nation and the Aboriginal peoples will continue to go on. But it does not need a fake voice. This voice is not even a voice of the majority of Aborigines. It is not the majority of the voice of people who are part Aboriginal. It is a construction. And we would have to decide that this construction, whatever it is an aspect of the continuous globalisation of our country that will see the complete obliteration by the end of the century of those two particular identities. These harsh questions that have been raised by the nationalists are the truthful questions, the right questions that need to be asked. When the referendum comes, we intend to vote no. And between now and that referendum, we are going to conduct a very energetic propaganda across our country in favour of a no. We work separately to others, but we strike together on the issue for whatever reason anyone wishes to vote no, even a partly misguided reason that they wish to vote no. We will be there with them to vote no. So I reiterate, consider the fundamental issues again that are not being talked about in this debate. Issues that are so fundamental, it goes to the very core of our country. And it is all about race. It is about the abolition of the two identities off the continent by the end of the century. Vote no. Thank you.